For those people that aren't as lucky as I've been to get to know you a little bit, why don't you tell them a little bit about your Japan business story, the original story that kind of brought you over to Japan, just to give people a bit of context.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Australia, as you can tell from my accent.
Takes one to know one.
Exactly. Early days of desktop publishing, that it was not possible. It was not possible to print or to create products using and print products using double byte Japanese characters, and so it was a very heady days of making printers print in Japanese. And my brother was involved in that, and the company started and grew from there. But that was more of a pivot then into mobile devices, because, and we still do that now, and making mobile devices work in languages other than English. Most devices were made with an English only audience, but as we know, the rest of the world doesn't only speak English. So there was a big market opportunity at that time. And so we worked with all of the original small mobile devices, from the Newton to the Scions to Palm Pilots to various things. And then, of course, in 2008, when the iPhone was released, that was a no-brainer for us to take our products and port them onto the iPhone. And we're that's still our main business now.
Interesting. Even though the Japanese were definitely slower to adopt the iPhone, right, in 2008. So I remember in 2008 and 2009 when I was studying at university, it was still very much the flip phone culture with all the straps hanging from the phone. Like that was still very much the device that you were using. So what do you think enabled, or how have you kind of seen that from, you know, your perspective as not only a business owner and entrepreneur and also a foreigner in the land? How have you seen the development of not only the market, but maybe even the adoption from the customers?
I have a very soft spot for flip phones. When I arrived in 2000, my first product that I was involved in was a product called Tango Town on the iMode platform, and that paid my rent. And it's still paying some money now, 20 years later. So I still have a fondness for those flip phones. Yes, it was slow to be adopted, the smartphones, in Japan. That was, again, a language base, because a lot of the apps were not really designed with the Japanese consumer in mind.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Of course, that must have been a huge reason.
So the smart thing that Apple did right from the beginning was that the operating system itself allowed different languages to be supported. So it was a much better product than the original mobile devices, the Newton, which could not handle Japanese or non-English script. But the iPhone right from the get-go could support multiple languages. But most of the developers were US based, and it was .com bubble. Everything was focused on the English speaking market, which of course excludes a whole section of the global community. So it took a while for Japanese apps and Japanese, and the way Japanese people use devices has always been different, and I think a lot of that is also because people spend time on trains and have a lot more time to use apps. There's a lot of different factors, and I think a lot more than we can sort of talk about in a hour-long podcast.
Yeah, of course. What would you say the ones that stand out? What would you say those factors are? So obviously you mentioned, you know, the environmental things, like people have longer commutes and things like that. They're not in cars, they're on trains, etc. What do you think that the other kind of like specific or unique consumer behavior is when it comes to mobile devices in Japan?
Well, for a long time, especially with the flip phones, Japanese consumers were told what to use and how to use them. And that was because when you bought a Docomo phone, you got the Docomo suite of apps, and everybody used TV the same way. They used the internet the same way. And when the iPhone came out, it was so overwhelming that there was just so many different things, like what should I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just a little overwhelming at first, because Japanese people are so used to being told, this is the device that we've created for you, this is how you use it. And
Right.
Japanese
Where's the
people will,
guidebook? Where's the guidebook? Where's the
yes,
manual? Yeah,
where's
yeah,
the guy?
yeah.
Tell me what to do, and I'll do it, and I'll happy to spend money on it. But
Yeah.
that's in my look. I have no scientific background for that, but that's
No, no, this is
just
all
what I've
anecdotal. This is
observed.
all, and yeah, this is all an anecdotal experience. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. Okay. Tell me a little bit about, so if we go back to when, you know, you and your brother came over, I know your brother came first, but then you joined and you
Mm-hmm.
started rolling out these products. How, I'm just thinking, what was your customer acquisition process like? Has it changed since then? Was there kind of this strangeness to, you know, in the 90s, you know, Japan is coming off its bubble period. They're still very comfortable and confident in their economic stance in the world. There's not this uncertainty that I would say that they have now in 2020 with the declining population and, you know, and stagnant economy, even though, you know, they're consistently the third economy in the world, you know, but still we haven't seen a lot of growth there for a long time. Tell me what it was like coming over, building a business, and, you know, getting those huge brands. What was that like?
We started off working working very much on the bleeding edge customers. So
Yeah.
these are customers who are not really mainstream,
Mm-hmm.
and Japan is wonderful for niche marketing. Mainly because when somebody has a passion for something, they go all in, boots and
Otaku.
all.
They go crazy.
Like
Otaku. That's the otaku culture, right? Yeah.
completely. I mean, but you just look at someone decides, oh, I want to learn how to surf. They'll buy all the equipment, they'll study all
Yes.
the books, and they'll do everything before
That's
they've
right.
even put their toe in the water. Um, and you know, you go jogging, you buy everything before you even, you know, strap on some sand shoes and just go for a run in the
Yes.
park. It's
Uh-huh.
that type of, and again, I'm not a sociologist. I don't know why that particular phenomenon happens here, but
Mm.
as a marketer and as a product developer, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you really know your customer and you really know what drives them and what they need, and you provide that, they will be loyal, and they will buy everything that you put out, and price is not an issue. And so you're really not having to compete in an extremely elastic commodity market. You can really sort of have these vertical opportunities, and really sell everything you can to a small niche of customers who will pay the prices that you ask them, and that is a delight to work in.
Yeah.
And because you can really get some brand loyalty, and the nice thing is that they're not nameless, faceless people. You can actually have a community and develop relationships, and that's what we've really liked about working in Japan, is really helping the customers who want our stuff, will pay for our stuff, and they give you the love back. And it's sort of, you sort of think, well, that makes it, you know, I sleep well at night knowing that I've helped like my products has made somebody else happy. It's not just, you know, obviously the paycheck's nice, but
Yeah.
it's the people really appreciate what the effort that you put in, and that's what keeps driving us forward, to do things that are probably, for a big company, you know, it's not mainstream. The sort of stuff that we do is very, very niche. It's very technical. It's very complicated. For most big companies, it's sort of too hard to bother with. But we know our customer. We know what they like, and we know what they need, and they appreciate it. And that's the space that we live in. What was great about moving to an iPhone model was that Apple had this marketplace so that we could reach a whole new range of people. So a small software company like us could actually reach a broader global market that we just didn't have the resources to do before. Here in Japan, we were very much going through the software shops, and that was, you know, shrink wrap software, which is people buying CDs, and people just don't do that anymore. But working with Apple has been good and bad. But working with Apple has been good in that it's allowed us to reach people outside of Japan.
Yeah, I can imagine. I would love to know if, if I think about when you guys started to kind of now, you've seen some, you've ridden some real waves, like some really good times, but there's also been some like huge economic crashes in Japan, like particularly like the dot-com bubble, or like what the Japanese call the IMF crisis, what the rest of the world calls the Asian crisis, so even all these same economic crises are even labeled differently in Japan because different people are to blame, from the Japanese perspective and things like that. So tell us a little bit about what it was like to ride those waves, those economic waves, in the software industry, and then also maybe what the kind of lessons were out of that, and even what does your 2020 business look like?
I'll go backwards, I guess. 2020 business looks the same as 2019 business, but the software industry, because we, like I said, it's good working with Apple, it's bad working with Apple, because we are playing in their sandpit, and we have to play by their rules, and they keep changing their rules a lot. We like to have long vertical relationships with customers, whereas the Apple model, they want the quick and dirty, that keep buying the new and shiny, let's buy this. So there's a lot of challenges around that. They are bringing out, so let me roll back then to our iMode market, where it was a subscription based, and that was great for us because that was a regular income, and we were helped. The same people signed up and then stayed with us for a very long time. We're rolling that more into 2020 now with our with subscription based services, which Apple are now allowing to do. So it is coming a little bit full circle in the software industry. But riding the waves is hard, especially as a small company, because you are beholden to so many external forces, and you don't have a lot of reserves to tide you over like the big companies do. So it's I think everyone's having an interesting time right now, and there's going to be some winners and going to be some losers. So we're hanging on the best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. There's many kind of factors that are very unique to the Japanese market, right? So as you mentioned, there's things like, the natural disasters are synonymous with, day-to-day life in Japan. People just accept it. And because they accept it, they prepare for it, rather than, some other countries that if they have a natural disaster, everyone's shocked and doesn't kind of know what to do. So the Japanese, that's why they have these huge, cash reserves and things like that. So, to ride these economic waves that we talked about. But I'm super impressed that you've been able to take that like a synonymous global niche offering, because people, understand Japan as a very, where if the nail that sticks out, you hammer it down. Like, the Japan is the group think, but at the same time, they're also this crazy otaku culture. You can't deny that. Like there are these, really strange, niche markets. As you mentioned, as a niche marketer, it's a dream. And you're also, being a small company, you also employ Japanese people as well. And what I would love to know is what has your experience been like? And, as we were preparing for this call, one story in particular, stood out for me in terms of, yes, of course, people are people and, you have to serve them in that way. But has there been anything specific, or maybe even any responses to any particular situations that have kind of been Japanese specific, for you, and you being kind of that foreign manager and you having to manage, Japanese culture and your Japanese employees? Does anything kind of stand out?
We have we've had lots of challenges inside inside our working culture. Some of that is not maybe because we're foreign, it's also just because of our different personalities, and the personality of my brother, who is an interesting character, and And the thing is, we tell people right from the beginning when they start working for us, if you want your weekly meetings and you want your, you want to, you know, have your, be micromanaged, this is not the company for you. This is not the place. So we're unusual in that respect. And so there's a lot of people who try to manage, like this. We've had staff in the past that have tried to manage us and our style, and they want us to give them more of that hand-holding, micromanaging, and then daily accountability, and that's just not something that is going to work for us. So that said, we've had staff that have been with us for 20 years. So that the people that appreciate that and don't want to have that micromanaged culture fit in great with us. But the staff who are used to being watched over on a daily basis and like that, they don't fit in well. So it's really, we try to do it on a personality basis and on a case by case basis. And we are a family business, and we do try to have that culture inside, saying, look, you know, we're family. You're here because we trust you and we think that you're an adult. And you know, we expect you to come to us when you've got issues. You know, this is the overarching thing that we want to do for this month, this year, this project. You need to get on board with that. We can't. We're not going to force you. Yeah. So we are a little different in that respect.
I think that's so great. And, you know, one part of, you know, being a small business, and particularly in the industry that you're in, that there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs, and, you know, it's just about kind of, you know, moving through. But as we know, you know, and I think the fact that you mentioned, it's, you know, we have to go case by case. There are many, you know, younger Japanese people, even just Japanese people that have kind of reached mid-career and saying, you know what, I think I want something different. You know, I don't want that kind of salaryman, you know, life anymore. And they do end up, you know, changing. But there are, you know, days where sometimes it goes well, sometimes it goes less well. And one story that stood out for me that kind of made something that's so often referenced in a textbook, made it real, was when you mentioned that there was, you know, as it forever is in entrepreneurship, there was kind of a hiccup in the road, and then some of your Japanese employees found it too shameful and left. And for me, that was like, oh my gosh, this is where people think that, you know, culture is kind of just referenced in textbooks. No, it's a real thing. Can you give us a little bit more context to that?
Sure. We, being a software company, we sometimes have software bugs, and and we do our best to fix them. In the early days of the iPhone, piracy was a big issue for us, and there were people out there actively going out and cracking apps and then distributing them for free throughout, you know, dark web, you know, piracy areas. And we're actually under contract with our partners to keep the data safe. Okay. And so we put some checks and balances and some things in the code so that if cracks would happen, if the data would not be allowed out in the wild. So because again, we're working with publishers and we're working with copyrighted material, and so we're under contract to keep that safe as much as possible. One of the things we did was if there was a danger of a pirated app being out there, a message went out onto their Twitter account if they'd agreed to certain conditions along the way. But we had a software bug, and there was one day when legitimate users had that, there was a switch that went on and said, no, you're not a legitimate user. And we had a PR nightmare because, of course, sometimes media doesn't like the truth getting in the way of a good story. And it was at the time when there was a lot of talk about privacy issues and personal data. And someone had suggested that the way that our had announced that it was a pirated app, we were actively going onto somebody else, onto the user's Twitter account and posting on their behalf, which wasn't technically true. But, you know, of course, to explain that would have to somebody who wanted a headline was quite difficult. So so yes, we were trolled. I wish a PR nightmare on nobody. It was not good at all. So it went viral, and people who hadn't even bought our application felt the need to tell us what they thought of us, and it was unpleasant, and was unpleasant, and for a couple of weeks, and so of course the whole office just stopped, and we had to go into damage control and put out some press releases, but it still continued on, because again, that it was hard for us to convey the truth because at the time we were seen as the baddie software company that was attacking everybody's private data. Again, not true, but perception is difficult to overcome. But because of that, and because of that PR nightmare, there were a couple of staff members who just felt that they couldn't continue their employment, and I respect that. There was no harm, no foul. It was like, we understand. There were some that it wasn't a concern. Obviously, it was a problem for all of us. Yes, so you know, there were some staff members who didn't want to be associated with the company name, the brand name anymore. But we could have rebranded. And which is what a lot of companies would do. But we didn't. We you know, we did our mea culpas, and we did our best to explain, and then the news cycle moved on.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, you know, we need to be honest, and, you know, Japan's not shy of a scandal either, you know, so, you know, I do, you know, and each time, for example, one of the automakers has a scandal, they don't go and rebrand, you know, sometimes it's about getting through it. And sometimes, you know, if you can get through it, you do end up building a community or relationships, often with either sponsors or suppliers or customers, that ends up being stronger than before, you know, the entire kind of debacle happened. And as you mentioned, you don't wish a PR nightmare on anyone. But one thing that also we wanted to touch on today was the ability that when something like that comes and really gets you down, right, how to get back up again. And one thing that that I loved is that you mentioned that you don't, as much as, you know, your businesses in Japan, you said that you don't have the shackles of what it means to be Japanese, and you have this migrant mindset. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? You know, when things get tough, you know, what does not having a, you know, clear career path, you know, as you know, we'll get into, and that kind of migrant mindset, what is that, what are those things that have helped you get up after days like those PR nightmares?
When you run a small company, you've got no one else to blame. You've got no one else to sort of say, well, it's your fault. And well, what you can do is just say, yep, that's, you own it. And that's what we did at the time. We owned it. It's a software bug. Let's look at it and keep it in perspective, and not get sort of sucked into that hysteria. You know, in Japan, if someone is annoyed at another company, there's not a lot of suing that goes on. It's naming and shaming in the public, and the shame is a weapon of choice. But when you own a mistake and you say, yep, that was a mistake, I did it, I fixed it, there's nothing else that a person can do. Nothing else that you know, nothing else that that the media can do, because it's like, well, yeah, it was a mistake, and I did it. So I think the companies that get themselves into trouble is when they try to obfuscate, and, you know, it's not the crime, it's the cover up, as you always hear about.
Yes.
And so if there's no cover up, it's like, okay, yeah, it was a mistake. Let's move on. But that's something whether that's a cultural thing or whether that's something I learned from my family or from my father, in that, yeah, you make a mistake, you apologize, you own it, you apologize, and sincerely, and then you move on. Everybody makes mistakes. It doesn't define you. And I think that's what we bring to the table, that it's not very Japanese at all, but it's more of a human thing, I think, as well. There are some people in Western countries who can't deal with shame or judgment either. So that might just be a Northcott thing.
Yeah, no, but that's interesting, because you said that the mistake doesn't define you, and as you mentioned, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. So the thing that defines you is not your mistake, rather how you respond to that mistake, right? Or something, or that kind of thing that, you know, has got you down. So not only are you in the software business, you, as I'm sure people have been able to pick up from now on, or from listening thus far, have kind of picked up on that you're a woman of many talents, and that you can maybe juggle many other hats. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your current business, which is now, again, maybe the reason why I wanted to reach out to you in 2020, is that you have a very successful, or you've grown a very successful Airbnb or short-term stay business in Japan. And obviously 2020 being the year, the Olympics, the everything, right? And then that obviously just literally exploding in our faces. And it's exploded in a lot of people's faces, you know, but you're still here, you know, you kind of carrying on. So I would love to hear a little bit about this kind of new business, and a little bit about moving through this time now.
Sure. So I started up, you know, one thing that I always did with the companies is that I always see them as a vehicle to do things, and it gives you more freedom. So and my brother always encouraged me to say, look, if you've got an idea, a business idea, go for it, even if it's sort of different from our normal software business. So about 10 years ago, when my son was born, we were getting a lot more visitors, grandparents who wanted to come and see the grandchild, not us, the grandchild. And Airbnb was just sort of starting up, and it was sort of hard for us. Japanese houses being quite small, it was hard for us
tiny.
to.
There's no
Tiny
guest room. There's, just for people that are wondering,
there's
no guest room.
And you know, grandparents that are used to sleeping in beds don't do so well with futons in the living room floor. So we were looking at using Airbnbs for them, and then I thought, well, hang on, I know what real estate costs here. How about I do this for myself? So the idea was I would just rent a small apartment near our house that we could use for family and friends, and then when we didn't have any visitors, to actually just list it on Airbnb to cover costs. That was my ideal. That was my first idea, was just to cover baseline. But it was right at the start of when the tourist boom was hitting, and I was blown away by how busy and how quickly it took off. And then, you know, when I started making some fairly decent profit, you know, family members started sniffing around wanting a piece of the action. So we sort of got together and invested as a family into different properties around Tokyo. This is rentals. These are rental properties. It takes a lot of money to rent a property. And then my husband, who was working in a restaurant at that point, and working crazy hours for very bad money, and not seeing his child, we thought, well, you know, we're making all this new money now doing hospitality. He's from a hospitality background, so he left that job and came and worked with me on the hospitality side, and the short-term rental. So long story short, we got to 24 properties at one point, with a number of staff members, and that was built from just me renting an apartment, and it grew to that size, and you know, 7-figure business from nothing. And then regulations came in. to regulate the market. So we looked carefully about which properties were going to be viable, which ones we would license, which ones we would let go. And, we consolidated the business and still kept the same sort of margins, and but with less overheads. And that was singing along quite well. And our whole business model was geared to 2020. And January 2020, the calendars were full. It was looking fantastic. We had our staff, we had all our ducks in a row, feeling quite smug and chuffed about, this was going to be our year. And then Chinese New Year happened and people started to cancel, and it was horrendous. So February was shock. March was panic attacks on my living room floor.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
And just it's a roller coaster between your business interests and your personal interests, and this being such an unknown. So it's a business unknown and it's a personal unknown. And it was rough. It was a roller coaster. It still is a roller coaster. What we've done is we've closed it. We've had to look very carefully at the business, what's going to be viable, what's going to work. And so we've closed it, some more houses. We're still going. We have Japanese families who are stuck here. We're doing quarantine business. We're doing staycation business. So people who are needing some remote work spots.
Exactly. Because we've seen that, that working from home for many Japanese people, as we mentioned, not only, the size of the homes, but also like unstable Wi-Fi, and like, there's so much that goes into it that encourages people, to have that kind of staycation. That's so interesting. So if we go back just a little bit before we dive into the COVID stuff, many people say, renting an apartment in Tokyo as a foreigner is just a nightmare, but you were able to rent, was it 27? Did you say 27?
24.
So 24. So how does one go around renting 24 properties? Were they raising any eyebrows? Were they like, what is this woman doing with all these apartments? Or how was that?
We use the company a lot. And, when we first started doing it, it was a complete unknown. So we were just renting the apartments and then having all these strangers go in and out, which of course the homeowners association, the kumiais and started to react a little bit. That was a learning experience in itself. And again, you've just got to own it. You can't hide. You can't sort of lie. It's like, well, yeah, this is, this is what we've done and this is what we're doing. Is this a problem? Okay, it's a problem. Let's solve the problem.
So who goes? Do you go? Does your brother go? Who goes when they say we've got a problem? Do you go to the kumiai? Who goes?
I usually send my brother. His Japanese is much better than mine, and he's also very charming, and he has no fear. He has no fear, that man. Or if he has fear, he doesn't let it show. So I'm the warm and fuzzy, and he's the visionary, plow through, get it done. Yeah. Let's go. So and all you can do is just solve the problems as they come up. And so we learnt then to make sure that we were actively looking for partners who were interested in the business. And when it's someone else's property, it's they've got a right to say yes or no about what goes on in that property, and it's up to my job. It's my job to sell them, to say, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And some people are not interested and not wanting to hear something different, and that's totally fine. You just have to keep plugging away, and you get a no, you keep going, and then you find enough people who are open to the idea, and you give them guarantees about that you're responsible, and that you're going to look after their property, and that you're going to ensure that the guests are also respectful. Because we decided quite early that our marketing and our product, when people think of Airbnb, they think of, oh, a place to sleep. Whereas we very clearly identified that our product that we were selling was not cheap accommodation. We're selling you a local experience. We're selling you a home away from home. And so the guests that I attract, the guests that I will accept, are the ones that also want that product.
Want that experience,
if someone, and want that experience, and also all of the responsibilities that come along with that. So if you're looking for a cheap accommodation, I'm not your vendor. That's it's not a good it's not a good fit, and that's fine. That I send you off with love, but it's just not going to be the right fit. No judgment. But the people who do come along, who do want the experience, understand that when you're living in a Japanese community, there are certain things that you need to do. And that is, there are certain Japanese culture norms that we need to teach you. It's my job to be the educator. And you've also got to have guests that are eager for that experience. So, and so it's a real connection of people who want the local experience and us to provide the tools to make sure that they're successful at it.
And this connection has actually been consistent throughout your entire entrepreneurial journey. So obviously with your software company, and then also now with the short stay business, is that you are constantly and also having to very actively sell the mutual benefit for these foreign businesses in Japan. So it's not, simply like a one-way street and you're benefiting from, access to the Japanese market, but the Japanese market is very much benefiting from having, these very unique or niche businesses. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about how you manage, or what you've learned, or the insights along the way of that, of selling that idea of mutual benefit.
First of all, you've got to identify who your ideal client is. I mean, that's, marketing 101. Know your customer and know who you're selling to. It's not sort of a scattershot of like, here, look at my stuff, buy my stuff. It's like, no, I'm talking to you. You are my ideal client. I'm talking directly to you, and you're going to respond to that. So it's almost like a mind meld of communication, because it's not like I said, I don't necessarily sell consumer products. I sell sort of in the software business, we're selling very high end sort of technical bleeding edge products. Solutions to people who need it and want it. In the minpaku business, minpaku being the short-term rental business, I'm really connecting with people who are looking for that Japanese experience, and they're wanting to suck in all of the juiciness of what it's like to live in another country as a non-resident, and it's then my job to give them everything that they can suck up. So it's an education two-way street.
Tracey, but how do you do it? How do you find the energy? Why don't you just say some days, you know what, forget it, forget the lot of you, forget you, I'm done? How do you find the energy?
How do I find the energy? I think it's because the love that you get back, and because I do all of the customer service in my software business, and I do all the communications with the minpaku business, people that you've made their life easier, you've either allowed them to create memories, or in my software business, you've made their either study journey easier, you've helped them achieve their goals. That the appreciation they give back to you, I mean, it's giving me tingles now. That's what drives me, is that the people that you can really help really appreciate it. I can't help everybody, but the people that I can help give you so much appreciation back. That's what drives me.
Yeah. One thing that has kind of come up consistently with the entrepreneurial journey, and the entrepreneurial journey abroad has been that whatever the entrepreneurial journey is in your native country, in your native language, with family support, with knowing the local culture, with knowing the language and the law, is kind of whatever issues or challenges that you have. Also the benefits are also just on steroids. Like anything that any entrepreneurial experience abroad is just like under a magnifying glass or under a microscope. That's kind of how everything feels. How can we talk a little bit about, that you have this drive and you have this energy? How would you talk to some people, and this has kind of come up a little bit through the podcast, of people that are passionate and they love working and they love living in Japan, but there are those days that you get that dip, that you just don't have, that it
Sure.
maybe it's, for example, there's extreme cases, for example, like there's this, that you have a short-term rental stay business that is ready to, it's a rocket ship ready to go. 2020 Olympics are canceled. There's a global pandemic. Okay, what do you do? And then there's, other days where even before COVID, we all go through that kind of, migrant, roller coaster of sometimes you're just sitting on a train and you go, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And then, so what would you kind of say, or what are the things that you do personally that help you find that drive and that energy on the days that maybe it doesn't come naturally through, customer engagement?
I've been an entrepreneur 20 something years now, and it's without sort of without sort of planning it. I've really just been designing a lifestyle and designing designing what my life would look like. I don't have a boss. I don't have anyone telling me what to do, which is a good and a bad thing. It's good because you do have a freedom, but then you have freedom. So there's no one telling you that you've got to go out and make money, and then except when the bank comes knocking on your door and says, can you pay your mortgage, please? And so that is when you're the breadwinner for a family and you have a child, that does keep you going as well when you do have those days. At the same time, though, I think the Japan that I live in is different from the Japan that other people live in. My husband's Australian. We walk in the front door, and we live in Australia, or we live in our family bubble, even though we are migrants. My son goes to Japanese school, but we speak English primarily at home. And that's probably why my Japanese isn't as good as my brother's, because we do live in this little bubble that is located in Tokyo. But yeah, we walk in our front door and we have designed a system where we're comfortable. We don't feel like, it doesn't feel foreign to us. It just feels like home. Yeah. And that's the strength, I think, where I get my strength is that it's always come back to family. It's always come back to home. And that then recharges my batteries to go out in the world. I mean, I am an extrovert as well. So I do love the interaction with people, and living in Tokyo, you look at all of the benefits. It's like living in an amusement park 24 hours a day. Everything works, it's clean, it's safe, it's but if I want to go out and go to a bar at 3 a.m, I can. And so but if I want to stay cocooned in my little bubble, I can also do that too. So it's more about me just designing my own life, and I've had the ability to do that here, and I don't know that I could do that in another country.
What do you think the key elements are in designing a life?
That's a really interesting question. The key elements to designing a life. For me, it's kind of happened by accident, but looking back, it's like, well, this is what I've done. It wasn't that I set out to design a life. It was more of a case of, here is an opportunity. Yeah, I can do that. So I'll take the opportunity. And then it's more about saying yes than saying no. I'm not a very risk averse person, because I guess at the end of the day, I know that I have family that I can fall back on. I have my education and my smarts and my health. Touch wood, my health is, when you've got that, you sort of think, well, really, what's the worst that's going to happen? And then the more that you do things, the more that you take risks, or the more that you try things, it reinforces that, even if something bad does happen, it's not the end of the world. And it sort of then becomes instinctual that the fear goes away a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I think that two things kind of stood out to me. The first thing was that when you said that you create, that home space is very much designed by you. And I think that's so important, because there's so many of us that are, working directly with Japanese clients or Japanese suppliers, and, the opportunity to affect culture there is like next to none, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just is what it is. It's just a very established way of doing things, and you kind of fit in around it. And so rather than kind of coming home and then having to do that again, just acknowledge that you are this kind of double person, that outside is, one thing, but, at home I have a different kind of environment that actually enables me to go out the door and then, to live kind of my Japanese life, rather than viewing home as a rejection or as a rebellion to Japan. It actually helps you live a Japanese life. And I hadn't thought about it like that. And the second thing was that you mentioned action. And I think a lot of people, when they get stuck in their head of can't get up, can't go forward, COVID, I have a short-term rental business and COVID's happened. And, Japan is amongst the most strict travel restrictions in the world. Like, for example, Greece and Spain and Italy had already, were open to international, travelers and things like that. But Japan is very, had their stance, and it's very strict with their travel restrictions. But, that you mentioned action, to get to doing rather than just thinking about it.
Yeah, I think it's really important that to recognise that there are restrictions in Japan, and if you try to push against that, that's when I think people have trouble here. Is that they think, well, it shouldn't be like that. It should be the way that I want it to be. Well, I don't see it like that. What I do is I recognize what the challenges are, and then work around them, because you can't tilt it with windmills at all. But I think what the benefit is not having the shackles of being Japanese and being brought up in Japan, is that I don't feel the need to ask permission first. But I know that if someone will always tell me the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And if you've made a mistake, the thing is, you've got to apologize. But as long as you're moving through the world with good intentions, my advice to anybody trying to do business or even live in Japan is not to ask advice. Don't ask advice from people, because the answer will be, especially if it's new, the answer will probably be no. Or it's difficult.
And that's right. The advice thing is also, if somebody understands not only where you've come from in your story, but they also understand Japan. I'm sure you probably get it as well from like either, family back in Australia or friends abroad in the States. Like, why don't you do this? And you're like, you have no idea the kind of, professional playground that we have. It's different. So the person that's giving you advice has not only have context to you, but also to Japan as, as an ecosystem.
Yeah, but even asking advice from Japanese people, can I do this? If it's something that hasn't been done before, no. So, rather than asking for permission or looking for validation from outside, because you won't get it. And I think sometimes you see people come up to have some trouble in that they try to be as Japanese as the Japanese people. That's the other thing that I see.
That is the Shinkansen to failure. That is the fast train.
It is it also is the Shinkansen to burnout, because as much, even if you drink miso soup every day and and eat rice for breakfast and natto, you will never ever be seen as Japanese by someone outside. So you need to accept that right from the get-go, and you can't prove that you're Japanese in your heart. You'll never be able to prove that, and you'll only set yourself up for disappointment. It was interesting, Joe, though, when COVID did hit, I had someone come and talk to us about perhaps doing a news story on, the struggles of minpaku, like foreign minpaku hosts who have lost their businesses or are in their businesses are struggling. And he sat at my dinner table in my living room in a house that I've built in Japan, from a business that I built in Japan. And I pay my taxes in Japan, and my child goes to Japanese school. And he sat there and he said, "Oh, have you ever thought about going home?" And he meant it. He meant it. He didn't mean it like that, but it still was, at the time it was in the middle of COVID. And so I was a little bit fragile. And I said to him, "Look, you've really hurt me. You've really hurt my heart here. You're sitting in my home. This is my home." And that just reminded me again, okay, well, I'll never prove my loyalty to Japan, or I'll never prove that. So that's okay. Just understand the parameters that you're living in. My friends and my family, and the friends that my son goes to school with, all the people who actually know me know differently, and you've got to be comfortable with that. But to the general public, they don't see your heart. They don't see
that hurts.
It does hurt.
It really hurts, because if you think about it, and you think, that you employ Japanese people, you've brought jobs to Japan, you've contributed to the economy and all these things, and then someone is sitting in front of you, and I don't want to, bring economics into it, as in terms of, if you're, have more money, you're more successful, or anything like that. Success is on your own terms, but someone's that, and this person that, just is doing their normal job, and, you have two businesses, and you've been able to build things. And when they look at you, and they still are standing from this position of, this is, I'm supposed to be here and you're not. And you're thinking, I'm the one that can create things, and and you're asking me, and that hurts, that one. And it hurts that you just have to get over it as well.
It hurts that you have to get over it, and because, like I said, if you try to educate each person along the way, you are on the very fast track to burnout. So you have to just accept that that's what it is. But that said, migrants in any country have a rough time.
Australia, migrants in Australia, you hear horrific stories as well.
I mean, and I went to primary school with mostly migrants, and so I guess I understood from that side of things that and what I saw was, yes, I went to school with a whole lot of migrants in Australia, and they spoke different languages at home, and they ate different food at home, but they still managed, and they still had a life, and they had a life, and they had joy, and they had and they were able to thrive. And so that's what gave me the courage to think, well, yes, my son is, I can do it too. Or, I'm my husband and I, we're fine. It's more about, how is our son going to be moving through Japan with an Australian face, and what's his experience going to be like. So we do have a lot of conversations around that.
I can only imagine. And I'd love to totally dive into that at another stage, but I think I might get on a total tangent if I do. You said something to me that I not only kind of really took, to my heart, but I also have told other people, which is, you said, the only thing when, COVID hit and you had to pivot, that you said you can only do the next right thing. Just try to do the next right thing. And for me, that's kind of been so, it's so important. It's really kind of quite penetrated me in a way that it was so simple, but I don't know, I hadn't thought about it like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about what it's like doing the next right thing and pivoting in 2020?
Being a small business owner for 20 years, and having to ride lots of different waves through different software platforms and being beholden to other companies means that we haven't been able to have I haven't been in the habit of doing long-term I've never done a 5-year plan. I've never done a 10-year plan. I've just gone on gut going, okay, that's how I want to feel in 5 years, or that's how I want to, that's I want my life to kind of look like. I don't know exactly the steps that I'm going to do to get there. All I can do is have that kind of desire in mind and do the next thing that is going to get me there. And I think if I'd had some really hard and fast plans in place, then it probably would have wiped me out for a lot longer than it did. This year was all mapped out for us, and that's sort of the most that I really plan is a year in advance, and it was all this year was mapped out. So in March, when everything just went to hell in a handbasket, it was rough. And then I sort of sat down with my husband and we sort of just said, well, what are we going to do? And it's like, well, okay, well, the worst has happened, really. It's happened. We're still here. We're still, we've still got food on the table. The lights are on. Okay, let's not panic. Let's just do the next thing that we can do that's in our immediate frame of vision, and let's look for what, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, because it's not really that. It's just
right thing. It's the next
right thing.
Makes sense.
The next thing that moves you forward. I think you've got to always think about trying to keep moving forward, and recognizing that if you don't, then sort of you get to August and you think, oh, where's the year gone? So what I've been doing this year is that I've tried to sort of leverage on, what my assets are, and that's been my experience, and that's been my experience in the short-term rental market and being an entrepreneur. And I've tried to educate myself about the next thing that I could possibly do that's maybe a little bit more recession proof, and that's sort of digital sales and digital marketing. And I've been working on working on a consulting business. So again, that's something that I can control. It's something that I can design, and I can take one step at a time and do the next right thing.
Yeah, I love that so much. And if we kind of reflect on this journey, there's so much, and we've only really scratched the surface of what you've been able to achieve, and also the challenges that you've overcome. If we were to kind of look at not only that, like the good times, because in this kind of block of 20 years there's been incredibly good times as well, and then also with the the economic bubbles bursting, and then, for example, this new one, because it's COVID certainly is unique and it's new to us, but the essence of it, which is a reset of the economy and a complete re-questioning of social collaboration and things like that, that's kind of things that we've dealt with for decades, even from, oh my gosh, we're moving from the printing press to this to that, so this is not new. Humans, we're kind of used to it. If we were to kind of look back on the good times and the bad times, and then think about also that, and also through your migrant lens, if we were to kind of sum it up, what would you kind of say the key things that come to mind for you as to, okay, these are the things that help you do the next right thing?
To do the next right thing, you've obviously got to focus on the needs of the immediate needs of the people around you. So what are they going to need to thrive and be comfortable?
Good. And so don't go and sell something what someone needs in 10 years time. Sell them, if I need this right now, I understand in 10 years I might need that other thing, but I need this thing right now. Particularly, masks were a big thing. We ran
That's right.
Masks, I mean, stuff like that.
I mean, the big companies, the big tech companies have their 10, 20 year plan, because they're really, looking technology forward. I don't have the resources for that, and I don't have the runway for that. So I've got to figure out what needs are right now, and what problems can I solve right now with the resources I've got on hand, or what resources do I need to find to meet this particular problem that I can see right now. So so what I feel like my strength is really to identify holes in my knowledge base or my resource base, and find partners who can meet that, and then collaborate to solve a bigger problem. So I know that's sort of very generic, but that's what I've tried to do.
I think the people thing, because as much as, Japan has like a whole lot of challenges running a business, has a whole lot of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I think is perhaps more consistent than other markets that I've seen, particularly Australia. Like if you're out of business in Australia for 3 months, you're dead, you're done. No one ever, that's
Mm-hmm.
it. But in Japan, if you're going through like a lull period or something, and something happens, you can go back to your suppliers in a year or in 2 years or in 3 years time and say, actually, we're back and running, we're up and running again. Can we, restart our order? And they'll say, oh yes,
Mm-hmm.
世話になります。久しぶりです.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be happy to see you. And in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be dead. If you don't see someone for 2 weeks, you're dead. So I think
Mm-hmm.
this kind of like long-term and the people thing, and I think I'm with you. If the people payoff wasn't as high as it was, I think we wouldn't bother. And so if we kind of like wrap it up and we think about, it's like that there's the good times and there's the bad times, and we've also spoken about what it means to get through it. What's for you the next right thing on your calendar?
The next right thing for me, I'm really just trying to look at sort of helping sort of local Japanese market with the stays, and I'm looking at getting onto the Go-To campaign, so to see if there's sort of some domestic tourism that we can look at. With the software business, I'm we're still putting out tools, language tools, and tools that people can use to help educate themselves, because I think there's a massive, people are really trying to improve their education, because they understand that that's an asset that no one can take away, is what you know. And they're buying products to help them learn and grow. So that's what we do in our software business. With my consulting business, I'm trying to teach resilience, and also teach how to market to a niche, and to identify who their target guest is, or who their target customer is, and make sure they're marketing to that, rather than, again, scattershot, which is, you think, oh, I put a product out and I just hope for the best. That's hope marketing rather than targeted marketing.
Hope marketing. I haven't heard that. I love it. Is there something around resilience that we haven't touched on?
Resilience is something that you can teach yourself, as in, I guess the theme of my life really has been resilience. I've been fortunate in that my family have always been a rock, and the unconditional support has given me a certain amount of resilience. But also, through falling down 7 times, getting up 8 times, which is the old proverb as well, you do grow those muscles of resilience, and just knowing that it, again, trite, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or makes you, just makes you more resilient. And you just reevaluate what are your values and what are important. And for me at the moment, it's paying the mortgage and making sure that my family are safe and comfortable, and focusing on that and making decisions based around that to move forward.
Yeah. The only thing when I hear this fall down 7 times, get up 8 statement is the only thing wrong with that for me is it's more fall down 7,999 times and get up 8,000. That's it. And I thought if I only had to fall down 7, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
So
And
for me,
I think if you build in failure to your mindset, it's in you build it in, and you think about failing forward, which is something that I've been talking about a little bit lately. It's like fail often, but fail forward. You know, if you try to avoid failure, then you're not going to move forward. It's like, you know, a toddler when they learn how to walk. You don't. A toddler falls down, they just don't think about it. They just get back up and they just keep going. Otherwise, none of us, if we all gave up the first time we fell over, we would never walk. So you sort of take those lessons of you just, you know, don't be afraid of failure, because what is the worst that is happening? You know, it's not shameful to fail. It's not, and we need to get that out of our psyche. That fear of failure and fear of shame is really just holding back you, but also a culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to kind of wrap up or kind of like the takeaway for me is that it's so interesting to me that through these interviews and through these stories that we have at the Business Karaoke podcast is that very, very often the overarching story is know your customer, know yourself, know the market, rather than Japan is like this, or, you know, foreigners are like that, or something. It's so interesting that what seems to be the key to success, or what's the learning from failure, is not necessarily national kind of culture. It's more specific than that. It's more niche than that. And if you can find ways to connect better with that user, whether they're Japanese or otherwise, and if you can find ways to better learn, as you mentioned, and become a learning person and fail forward, then it sounds like it doesn't matter where you are, that you're on a good track to success. So I'd like to thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Brittany. It's been an honor. I appreciate it.